Hello, I'm Chris. I've thought I'd try and put together a short video on GMT's Unconditional Surrender. This is a game that I've had on my gaming shelf for far too long, sat unplayed, and I thought it was about time that it got some table time. So broke it open a week to 10 days ago, managed to print off the current living rules off a Consum World and read through those once. They seemed relatively straightforward once you read them. So I decided to start with the full campaign game. Didn't bother with any scenarios. I watched a couple of videos on Board Game Geek, which I would recommend for those hoping to get some sort of insight as to how the game plays. It's different from a lot of traditional war games where one side moves all their counters, usually on a hexagonal map, and then you conduct a number of attacks based on all those just moved counters. In Unconditional Surrender, you have production points, which allows you to activate a unit or an army, and that will get between 8 and 10 movement points, depending whether it's a leg or a mobile unit, with which it can attack, and it can probably attack multiple times. That's more the norm. So you basically pay for the combat and you pay to enter the hex, and so an armoured unit with 10 movement points could potentially attack 5 times if it was attacking five clear hexes in good weather. Weather's very key in this as well, more so than I've seen in other games. There's 3 weather states: fair, poor and severe. I think severe, basically very little happens. In the poor state, things happen very slowly, and in the fair weather, that's where things really seem to be more fluid, and you get a lot more activity on the various fronts. I've played a number of these European sort of grand strategic games over the years. I've tried Third Reich, the Advanced European Theatre of Operations by Decision Games, not for the faint-hearted, but a game that I truly admire. I've played the NEPA Games ETO, and just recently I've been playing a lot of the Second World War by One Small Step. And those of you who have followed the folder on Consum World will notice that I did tend to dominate that for a while, for which I do apologise. It became a bit of a crusade to try and, in my mind, fix a set of rules that I thought worked. I've posted loads of stuff on there. If you're interested, go and look at it and see what you think. I think it's a nice game. It covers both the European and the Pacific theatres, which not many of these games do. They tend to do either one or the other. I guess the exceptions would be things like Axis and Allies and World in Flames. I've played the former but not the latter. World in Flames seem to keep on wanting to evolve into the next creation, so that's one I never tried. So what are my thoughts on this? Well, so far very favourable. It's still early days. I'm up to August 1940. It's following a very historical path. I went west first. Poland took a turn to sort out. We've just had France has just been conquered. The Italians have now activated, and so it's a fairly comfortable, for me anyway. And when I play these games for the first time, I try and do things in an historical time frame, or at least in the right sequence, and that gives me a feel for how the game plays. I'm sure with more plays you get more confident to try a few curveballs and to do some other slightly different strategies. You have a diplomatic cup in this game, which allows you to put chits, or allows you to actually pick chits from the cup. Certain events on the game allow you to put chits in the cup. So, for example, when the Axis conquer a country, they can put a pro-Axis chit in this cup, which they may draw out, which will give them some benefits in terms of having some influence over the other neutral countries. So this is obviously a bit of a game changer. It can change the tempo of the game and the how the map is divided up into pro and neutral countries, pro to either side. The game also covers a strategic warfare. Does it in a relatively abstract way, but that's fine for me. It covers most of the effects of the Germans having naval bases on the French west coast, and there's a strategic bombing campaign. You can have air units on the Norwegian coastline, which clearly would be able to interdict the convoys going to Murmansk, and that's on enough of a level for me. I'm sure the game will slow down considerably when we get into Russia. I've yet to explore that. Now, I did mention there were a couple of videos that were done by Salvasta and another gentleman whose name I don't remember. Apologies for that. The first one covered an example in Poland, which is good to get your head around how the ground combat works. And then the second video covers action in the Mediterranean. Now the Mediterranean is a particularly obviously naval dominated theatre, and it's key in terms of being able to trace supply across the Mediterranean Sea, and that's done using convoys. And when you do your supply trace, the enemy can always intercept you, and they may be able to interdict you. The interception is automatic, the interdiction is not. And you can try multiple times, because naval units and air units in this game basically accrue sorties, and they can still do things up to they've done their 6th sortie, at which point they are spent. The rub is that you can only replace 2 sorties each turn, so you can run them right down, do lots of activity, and then you're going to be out. Well, you're certainly going to be below your best for a number of turns, because you are penalised in combat for the number of sorties that you've built up on the units. So there's a careful sortie management sub-game going on there, which I'm looking forward to in the Mediterranean, because that will be a bit of sort of cat and mouse. You've got Force H at the moment in Gibraltar. That'll be sailing across to Malta to try and support the British forces in the Mediterranean. There's a single Western Defence Force Allied, so British Army, currently in Egypt. So that will be an interesting contrast to the large forces that are available on the Eastern Front. So I think the designer's done a good job. I played Krieg many times with some good buddies over the years. That, of course, developed into Totaler Krieg, and we stuck with that for a long time. And I know Salvasta was involved in those games. And there are elements of that you can see in this. The delay mechanism for the chits. You get some markers that you can commit to combat either ground support or some additional tanks, or some airborne. You can drop the airborne troops on the enemy hex, and a lot of these chits then have to be you have to roll a dice to see as and when they come back onto the turn track. So there's shades of the delay roll. For those of you who know Total Krieg, when you used air units each turn, you put them in the sort of delay box, and then you'd roll a dice with a DRM to see when they came back. So hope that's not too rambling. I'm trying to encourage those people who are thinking looks a bit daunting. The rule book looks quite daunting. I've printed mine out now in a big folder. It's 50 odd pages, which on the face of it is, I suppose, on the relatively heavy side. But having said that, a lot of the pages are events. When certain conditions apply in the game, you get an event and you go and look it up. So that's not really things you need to worry about too much in terms of being able to play the game. To be able to play the game well, you probably need to be quite familiar with them, but you can certainly start the game without having to have fully understood all of the potential conditional events. And sometimes it's quite a nice surprise to see things happen that you perhaps weren't expecting. Similarly, there are some policies that countries have to adhere to in terms of home defence, but they're relatively straightforward. So the actual gameplay in terms of moving and combat is pretty straightforward, and the very low counter density helps those who don't want to be moving around multiple sort of 2, 3, 4 counters per hex and having a long, continuous front line, which sometimes one dropped dice in the wrong place can cause all sorts of havoc. I've seen it happen. Sometimes it's not all that pretty. So for me, really enjoying it so far. Still right at the bottom of the learning curve of the game, where there's some of the things that is probably going to bite me when I play this in a couple of months' time at a small convention with some friends here in the UK. But so far, I'll give it 2 big thumbs up. Thank you.